This lesson is on data and the 6 W's. So what exactly is data? Data is essentially information that we record, whether it's numbers, labels, etc., together with its context. So context being where did we get the information, why did we get the information, etc. That is the information we will then use to make conclusions down the road. So looking at these values, 44, 48, 55, 76, what do we know about them? Nothing. We don't know what they represent. We don't know why we recorded them, when we recorded them. So it's important that we know that in order to be able to make inferences or make decisions based on that data. So the context of the data has 6 parts. This one's a little bit of a cheat down here. But who, what, why, when, where, and how. So again, that's a little bit of a cheat, but again, we're just going to call it a W just for fun. So these are what we need to know about our data so that we can then make decisions. The first of these is who, and the who is the data representing. So who doesn't have to be a person necessarily. It's basically who we're analyzing the data about. What is your data measuring? So what are we measuring about the data? The variables are about each individual. They always include a unit of measurement if it's quantitative, and we'll talk about quantitative and categorical. So categorical is a variable that names categories. So for instance, if we were measuring eye color you don't put a number to. You say, well, I have brown eyes, or I have green eyes, or I have blue eyes, or whatever other eyes you might have. So these are categories because you will fit into one of those categories. Quantitative means that we're measuring an actual value as a numerical value. So it's important to understand the difference between these two, because for quantitative, you should have a label for sure. But if you're dealing with categorical, of course, you're probably not going to have a label. Why are we studying the data? So what's the purpose? It's obviously pretty important for us to know why we're studying data. Otherwise, what's the point? So it can help us to sort of know. Again, a quantitative example, finding the average rating on a survey. A categorical example, finding the count of each response on a survey. It can help us to know, why are we going through the process of collecting and analyzing the data. So it's important that you know the who, what, and the why. The other two are good to knows, nice to knows. So the when, where, and how. When did we record the data? Where did we record the data? The how is how did we record the data? So did we take an online survey? Did someone come into your classroom and ask everybody to answer certain questions? Was it a census? A census means, obviously in the broader sense of the term, we know the census happens in the U.S. Once every 10 years. But a census statistically means that you're speaking to every person in that particular population. It's helpful to understand these, but they're not required to know. So let's do an example together. Because of the difficulty of weighing a bear in the woods, researchers caught and measured 54 bears in the Henry Dorley Zoo. So Henry Dorley, if you're not from Omaha, awesome zoo. You should come here just to visit that. The researchers recorded their weight, neck size, length, and sex. They hope to find a way to estimate weight from the other more easily determined quantities. So they wanted to be able to estimate weight based on these other things that are a little bit easier to measure than putting a bear on a scale. So let's take a look at the W's for this particular instance. Who? Who would be the 54 bears in the Henry Dorley Zoo, because that is who we're measuring. So that should be our who, and more specifically, that should be the 54 bears. I should change that. 54 bears at the zoo. What are we measuring? Well, we're measuring the weight, and that's going to probably be in pounds. The neck size, I'm going to assume that's going to be inches. The length, probably also inches. That's not really given, but we'll just assume. And the sex is obviously a different value than these. The weight, the neck size, and the length, these are all the quantitative variables, where we're actually going to record a number, whereas sex is a categorical variable. So again, weight, pounds, neck size, length, sex, categorical. When, it doesn't say any in here at all when it was recorded. So we just say it isn't given. Where was it recorded? So it was recorded at the Henry Dorley Zoo, which is in Omaha. Why did they do that? Again, that's pretty important to know the why. The why is that we want to be able to estimate weight from other more easily determined quantities. So estimate weight given other parameters. And how did they do it? Well, all we know is that they caught and measured, and we don't really know much beyond that. So caught and measured, and that's all we know. In all of the videos where we do some practice together, I like to give you one practice to do on your own. So whenever you get to a video that has the blue writing or the blue star, that means this is a question that I want you to utilize your pause button and try this question on your own to see if you actually understood the material that we've talked about together. So I'm going to give you a moment. I would like you to press pause. I want you to read over this question, and then I want you to see if you can find all 6 W's. When you're ready, press play and we can check our work together. So this question is about a bicyclist. It's a researcher who wondered whether drivers treat bicycle riders differently when they wear helmets. So he rigged his bicycle with an ultrasonic sensor that could measure how close each car was that passed him. He then rode on alternating days with and without a helmet. Out of 1,000 cars passing him, he found that when he wore his helmet, motorists passed 3.8 inches closer to him on average than when his head was bare. So let's talk about these W's. The who. We're trying to find out who are we measuring. Well, we're talking about the 1,000 cars passing him. That's who is being studied, is the 1,000 cars. What were we measuring? Well, we're measuring whether or not he wore his helmet, which of course would be categorical, and we're measuring how close each car was that passed him. So how close, and obviously we're talking about inches. So we're talking about how close, and that's quantitative in inches. When, it doesn't really say in here when. It also doesn't say where, so we just know that it isn't given. Why are we measuring this? Because he's curious how motorists respond whether or not he's wearing a helmet. So he wondered whether drivers treat bicycle riders differently when they wear helmets. So that's the why, to determine if they treat bicycle riders differently. And the how, well, we don't know a lot about the how. We just know that he's using an ultrasonic sensor, so we're assuming that that's giving those values to him. Next up, we're going to talk a little bit more about the difference between categorical and quantitative variables.